They weren't just betting with coins anymore. They were betting with a human life, and that life was mine. The summer sun bore down hard on Laramie, Wyoming, a town that stank of horse sweat, stale whiskey, and the dust that never seemed to settle. For most folks, Laramie was just a stopover, a place to gamble, drink, and strike a bargain in the back room of a saloon. But for me, Leah Hensley, it was a prison. My mother had died when I was just a girl, leaving me with a father and an older brother who valued a deck of cards more than their own kin. My father, Jonas Hensley, was a hard man with a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. He was known at the tables for his temper and for the way he could lie about his debts until a revolver was pressed to his gut. My brother Tom was his shadow, smaller but quicker with a sneer. He never missed a chance to remind me that I was just an extra weight on the wagon, a mouth to feed. I cooked for them. I scrubbed for them. I mended their clothes until my fingers bled, but no matter how hard I worked, they told me the same thing, over and over again. You're worth nothing. I heard it so often, it began to ring in my skull like a hammer on an anvil. That day, my father's luck had finally run out. He'd lost big at the Brass Lantern, a saloon thick with tobacco smoke and cheap talk. The pot was stacked high, and the men at the table wanted their due. Desperate, my father cast his eyes toward me. "Got something better than coin," he said, spitting into the sawdust on the floor. "Got a girl, strong back, not much else, but she'll fetch her keep." I froze where I stood, clutching a tray of empty mugs. My heart pounded so hard I thought the whole room could hear it. My brother Tom just smirked. "She's 24 and still unwed," he added. "Too proud, too sharp-tongued, but she can work like a mule, if you don't mind the mouth." A wave of coarse laughter rolled around the table. The dealer, a red-faced railroad foreman named Miles Rankin, licked his lips. He was a heavy man, his fingers fat and ringed with silver. He leaned forward, his eyes crawling over me like I was livestock. "I'll take her," Rankin said, tossing a handful of coins onto the table. "More than she's worth, truth be told. A girl like that belongs in a tent outside the camps, warming beds and hauling water." The room erupted with jeers. Men slapped their knees, laughing at the cruelty of it all. I stood there, rigid, my hands gripping the tray so tight my knuckles turned white. I would not give them the pleasure of seeing me break. But inside, shame and fury were twisting together into a tight, hot knot. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw my way out of there. But when I looked at my father, I saw nothing but relief in his eyes. It was like getting rid of me was a favor to him. And just when I thought it was over, just when my fate seemed sealed, the saloon doors creaked open. Silence fell over the room like a heavy shroud. A tall man stepped inside. He wore a buckskin shirt, worn from years in the weather. A rawhide satchel hung from his shoulder, and a Bowie knife was sheathed at his hip. His skin was the color of the high plains sun, his black hair tied back at the nape of his neck. Most men in town called men like him savage. But none of them ever dared to say it to his face. It was Gus, an Apache hunter who came down from the hills every few months to trade hides for powder and tools. He was younger than you'd expect, maybe 27, but his eyes, shaded by the brim of a worn hat, seemed older than stone. The crowd shifted as he walked, each bootfall slow and deliberate. He stopped at the table where Rankin's coins still gleamed. My father narrowed his eyes. "What do you want, Engine?" Gus didn't answer right away. He slid the satchel from his shoulder and set it down with a heavy thud. From inside, he pulled a folded pelt, a winter buffalo hide, broad and soft, worth more than all the silver on that table combined. He laid it flat, covering the cards and the coins. "If she is no use to you," Gus said, his voice low and measured, "then I will take her." The room was dead silent. Then Rankin barked out a laugh. "What, trade a hide like that for her? You can have her, Hunter, though she'll probably cost you your sanity." My father leaned forward, his eyes greedy. She's yours then. One less mouth to feed. But Gus wasn't looking at my father. He wasn't looking at Rankin. His gaze was fixed on me. He saw the fury burning behind my eyes. He saw the way I held myself straight, refusing to bend. He saw a fighter, not a victim. You can walk out of here alone, Gus said softly, his words for me and me only. Or you can come with me. It is your choice. Choice. The word struck me harder than any slap my father had ever given. No man had ever offered me a choice. The crowd waited, hungry for the drama. My heart thundered in my chest. For a second I thought I might faint. But then I set the tray down. I wiped my trembling hand on my skirt, and I lifted my chin. I'll go, I said. My voice did not shake. Rankin swore. My father sputtered. Tom cursed under his breath. But none of them moved to stop me as I walked past them, past the coins on the table, past the family that had sold me. Gus turned without another word and held the saloon doors open. Together, we stepped out into the blinding sun. I didn't look back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my tears. All I saw was the wide horizon, the trail cutting west, and the man beside me who had given me, for the first time in my life, the right to decide. He led me to his horse, a sturdy bay with a scar along its flank. He swung up with an easy grace, then offered his hand. I hesitated for only a moment. Then I placed my palm in his and climbed up behind him. Where are we going? I asked. Gus nudged the horse forward, away from the dust and the shame of Laramie, toward the dark mountains that stood like sentinels against the sky. Home, he said simply. And with that single word, the first step of my new life began. A life I didn't know was already in more danger than the one I'd just left behind. The trail out of Laramie was a ribbon of dust that stretched toward the Medicine Bow Mountains. The town faded behind us, and soon the only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves and the low creak of leather. I sat behind Gus, my hands uncertain on the saddle. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Who was he? What did he want? Why trade a fortune in fur for a woman nobody wanted? But I stayed silent. Finally, when the heat of the day was at its peak, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Why? I whispered. I thought he hadn't heard me. Then, without turning, he spoke. Because you looked like you wanted out. It was a plain truth, and it hit me with surprising force. He hadn't seen a victim, he had seen a prisoner. We rode on. The world opened up, wide and wild. Hawks wheeled overhead. With every mile, the town felt more like a bad dream. But a new fear crept in. What if I'd only traded one cage for another? Late that afternoon, he stopped at a shallow creek. He swung down and offered me his hand. My legs trembled as I slid to the ground. He knelt, filled a tin cup with water, and handed it to me. Drink, he said. I drank. It was cold and clean. I realized he hadn't drunk first. He'd made sure I had my fill. That small act of respect stung my eyes more than the dust ever had. We ate jerky in silence. He was quiet, his gaze fixed on the trees, as if he could read a story written in the leaves. I stole glances at him. His face was weathered, but there was a stillness in him, a calm that felt dangerous. We ride a few more hours, he said, rising. We'll camp in the foothills. As dusk settled, the land changed. Rolling plains lifted into broken ridges. The air grew cool and smelled of pine. I felt something inside me loosen. This world was wilder, freer than any place I had ever known. We made camp near a stand of aspens. He tethered the horse and gathered wood. I stood there, useless, until he handed me a branch. Here, he said, showing me how to stack the kindling. He wasn't ordering me. He was teaching me. The fire sparked to life, painting the hollows of his face. For the first time, he looked almost young. When the fire settled, he laid out his bedroll. Then he placed a second blanket near the flames. Yours, he said. I stared at him. You're not. He shook his head and lowered himself onto his own blanket. Rest. Long trail tomorrow. I had braced myself for demands, for rough hands, for cruelty. Instead, I was left with the crackle of the fire and the vast, starry sky. I lay awake for a long time, thinking. This man had traded a fortune for me, yet he treated me as if I belonged only to myself. I didn't know it yet, but he wasn't a savior. He was a hunter. And he hadn't come to town for me. He had come for the man who bought me, Miles Rankin. And I had just walked right into the middle of his hunt. The next day we climbed higher into the foothills. The air grew cooler, shaded by tall pines. At one point, Gus stopped, crouching to touch the ground. He motioned for me to look. Elk, he said. I saw the deep cleft of hooves pressed in the mud. How can you tell? I asked. Wide stride, heavy, a buck. It wasn't just tracks to him. It was a story written in the earth. By late afternoon, we reached a clearing beside a stream that tumbled over rocks. Gus stopped, scanning the space with careful eyes. This will be home, he said. Home. The word was both terrifying and hopeful. He unloaded the horse, tools, a hatchet, rope, the heavy satchel of hides. Then he looked at me. A cabin will stand here. It will take time. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice small. His eyes met mine. Choose. Stay or leave. There are no chains here. My throat tightened. It was the first real choice I'd ever had. I looked at the stream, at the tall trees, at the mountains rising against the sky. My chest ached with possibility. I'll stay, I whispered. He gave a short nod, as if he'd expected nothing less. He handed me the hatchet. Then we build. That night, my hands were already blistering, but every clumsy swing of the axe felt like I was carving my own name into the land. I was building something. For the first time, I felt something closer to belonging than to shame. And I saw something else. As Gus sat by the fire, he pulled a small, worn piece of leather from his pocket. He stared at it, his jaw tight, his eyes filled with a cold, hard anger. What is that? I asked. He looked up, and the friendly calm was gone. His eyes were the eyes of a predator. A promise, he said, his voice a low growl. It's a piece of a saddlebag, from a man who took everything from me, Miles Rankin. My blood ran cold. The man from the saloon, the man who had bought me. Gus hadn't saved me out of kindness. He was in Laramie for revenge, and by choosing to follow him, I had made his enemy my own. I had escaped one prison only to walk into the middle of a war. The clearing became our world. We worked from sunup to sundown, and the cabin began to take shape. Gus was a patient teacher. He showed me how to swing an axe, how to strip bark, how to lash logs together. My hands grew calloused, my muscles hard. I was becoming stronger than I ever thought possible. But the shadow of Miles Rankin hung over us. He was a foreman for the railroad, Gus told me one night by the fire. But he was more than that. He ran a crew of thieves. They raided homesteads, stole livestock. They hit my family's camp 2 winters ago. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his hands were clenched into tight fists. They took our horses, our food. They left my wife and my boy with nothing. They didn't survive the winter. The story hit me like a physical blow. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was a wall built around a grief so deep it had no words. The piece of leather, I whispered. I cut it from his saddlebag as he rode away, Gus said, his eyes burning in the firelight. I swore I would find him. He had been tracking Rankin for 2 years. The trail had finally led him to Laramie, to the Brass Lantern Saloon. I didn't expect to find you there, he said, looking at me. When he bought you, it became about more than just revenge. That night, he taught me to write my name. He drew the letters Laya on a flat piece of wood with charcoal. My father had always said learning was a waste on a girl, but as I copied the shapes, my hand trembling, I felt a piece of myself I thought was lost forever click back into place. I wasn't just a girl who had been sold. I was Laya, a person with a name. Our life took on a fragile rhythm. We built, we hunted, we prepared for the winter. And in the quiet moments, a bond formed between us, a silent understanding of two broken people trying to build something whole. Then, one afternoon, the birds in the forest went silent. Gus paused, axe in hand. "Riders," he said. My blood ran cold. It was my father and my brother, Tom. They rode into the clearing like they owned it. "We're here for her," my father sneered. "There's a rancher in Cheyenne offering 10 head of cattle for a wife. We've come to collect what's ours." Before Gus could move, I stepped forward. My heart was pounding, but my voice was clear. "No," I said. "I'm not for sale, not anymore." My father's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful whelp! You'll do as you're told." He lunged for me, but he never reached me. An arrow sprouted from the dirt at his feet, quivering. Then another. We looked up. On the ridge overlooking the clearing, a half-dozen Apache warriors sat on their horses, bows drawn. My father and brother froze, their faces pale with terror. "This is our land," Gus said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the mountains, "and she is under my protection." I didn't know who the warriors were. I didn't know Gus had his own family watching over him. Another secret, another layer of this quiet, dangerous man. My father and brother scrambled onto their horses and fled without looking back. I had faced them down. I had won. But as I watched the warriors on the ridge melt back into the trees, I realized something. Gus hadn't just been building a cabin. He had been choosing his ground for a war, and it wasn't just with my family. It was with Miles Rankin, and my father, in his greed, had just told Rankin's men exactly where to find us. The first snows fell, and with them came a new, deeper chill. The visit from my father and brother had been a warning. "They will tell Rankin where we are," Gus said one evening, his face grim. "He won't let the insult in the saloon go unanswered, and he won't let a witness to his past crimes live." The peace we had built felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold river. We started preparing for a different kind of winter. Gus showed me how to use the rifle, its weight heavy and unfamiliar in my hands. He taught me how to move silently through the trees, how to read the signs of a man's passage as easily as an animal's. One day, while hunting, he was gored by an elk. The wound was deep, and a fever took him. For a week, he was delirious, his body burning. I became his strength. I hunted, I chopped wood, I nursed him, cleaning the wound with herbs the way my mother had once taught me. In his fever dreams, he would call out a name, Lena, his wife. My heart ached for him, for the loss he carried in silence. I sat by his side, whispering the letters of my own name, a strange prayer in the quiet cabin. He survived. The fever broke, and slowly his strength returned. But the experience had changed us. The roles had been reversed. I had saved him, just as he had saved me. One evening, he looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "You're stronger than this mountain, Laya." No one had ever called me strong. Tears welled in my eyes. He reached out and took my hand. "The storm passes," he whispered. "You'll still be standing." But the real storm was yet to come. A group of freighters passed through the valley, their wagons laden with goods for Cheyenne. Their leader, a friendly man named Lyle, saw our cabin and the life we had built. "Heard you can read figures and keep a ledger," he said to me. The story of the woman who could write had traveled. "We need someone to manage our books in Cheyenne, pays fair, a roof over your head, a real job." Cheyenne, a town, a new life, a chance to be someone other than a girl who had been sold. That night, the offer hung between us. "It is your choice," Gus said, his face unreadable. He handed me a small, hand-carved map. "This will take you there, the easiest trail after the snows melt. And if I don't go? I asked, my voice trembling. Keep it anyway, he said, so you will always know the way back. You're not going to ask me to stay? I whispered. His dark eyes softened. You are not mine to keep, Laya. That is the point. 2 days later, Lyle returned. Well, miss, you ready? I stood there, the map in my hand, my heart torn. I thought of a life in a town, a life of respect. Then I looked at the cabin, at the garden I had planted, at the quiet, steady man who had shown me what it meant to be free. No, I said, my voice firm. I'm already home. I handed the map back to Gus. He didn't smile, but his eyes held a warmth that was more than enough. But our peace was short-lived. A week later, a lone rider came. It was Lyle, the freighter. But he wasn't smiling this time. His face was pale, his horse lathered. Rankin? He gasped. He knows about the cabin, and he's not coming alone. He's got 12 men with him, hired guns from the railroad camps. They're coming to wipe you off the mountain. He looked from me to Gus. And that's not the worst of it. He's been telling folks that Gus is the one who led the raid on his own family, that he killed them to keep the location of a lost Apache gold mine to himself. The final twist of the knife. Rankin wasn't just coming to kill them. He was coming to erase Gus's history, to paint him as the villain in his own tragic story. He's turned your grief into his greed, I whispered to Gus, my heart breaking for him. Gus's face was a mask of cold fury. Then he will die on this mountain. The battle was coming, and this time there would be no escape. The world went quiet. The birds stopped singing. The wind held its breath. We knew they were coming. Gus moved with a deadly calm. He wasn't just a hunter anymore. He was a warrior defending his home, his honor. We didn't just barricade the cabin. We turned the entire clearing into a trap. We dug pits. We set snares. We rigged a deadfall of heavy logs on the main trail. The homesteaders and trappers from the valley, the ones who had seen me stand up to my father, the ones whose children I was teaching to read, they came. They appeared at the edge of the trees, rifles in hand. They had heard Lyle's story, and they had chosen a side. We weren't just 2 people anymore. We were a community. Rankin's men rode in at dusk, confident and arrogant. They expected an easy fight. They were wrong. The battle was fierce and brutal. The clearing became a chaotic swirl of smoke, gunfire, and shouting. Our traps worked, sowing confusion and fear. Our neighbors fought with the grim determination of people defending their own. In the end, it came down to 3 people in the firelight. Me, Gus, and a wounded, enraged Miles Rankin. He lunged at me, his eyes wild. "The mine!" he screamed. "Tell me where it is!" "There is no mine," Gus said, his voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "Only the graves of my family." Rankin laughed, a crazed sound. "Then you'll die for nothing." He raised his pistol to fire at Gus, but I was faster. I swung the heavy iron skillet from the hearth with all my strength. It connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. He crumpled to the ground, and the fight was over. Justice had finally come to the mountain. In the aftermath, as the valley folk helped us tend to the wounded and bury the dead, the preacher who had come with them stepped forward. "This place," he said, looking at the small cabin and the community gathered around it, "is more of a church than any building in town." That spring, under the tall pines, with the whole valley as our witness, Gus and I spoke our vows. He slid a simple ring, carved from the wood of an aspen tree, onto my finger. "I used to believe my worth came from what others could take from me," I said, my voice shaking with tears I no longer had to hide. "But this man gave me a place to stand, a name to carry, and a life of my own choosing." Gus's voice was rough with emotion. "I built this cabin to be alone, but she made it a home. Our life was never easy. The winters were hard, the work was endless, but it was ours. We raised 2 sons, strong and quiet like their father. I taught the children of the valley to read and write. my small school a beacon of hope in the wild country. I had come to this mountain a girl who had been told she was worthless, a piece of property to be sold and discarded. But in the heart of the wilderness, with a man who saw my strength when I couldn't see it myself, I found something more valuable than any silver or gold. I found my worth. And I found my home. If this story of a woman who found her voice and a man who found his heart again moved you, please hit that like button to help us share more tales like this. And if you believe in the power of second chances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us.